So the biggest risks of death go back to inventory planning in e-commerce. And one of the biggest risk moments tends to be right now is that you're going to have to place a PO for Q4. And Q4 is usually your largest inventory outlay and tends to tie to a period, unless you've already bought into four peaks theory, an area, the summers are a little slow. That's what we just came out of talking about last episode. And so you have this dual risk. You have low existing cash flow and a need for your largest PO. And so this moment right now represents a really high-risk decision that you might need to make.
This episode of the e-commerce playbook is brought to you by Omnisend. If you're serious about growing your brand through email and SMS marketing, Omnisend has your back. It combines powerful automation, smart segmentation, and real-time performance insights, all in a platform that's intuitive and built specifically for e-commerce. With pre-built workflows, dynamic sign-up forms, and full multi-channel capabilities, Omnisend helps brands scale without unnecessary complexity. Join over 125,000 e-commerce marketers who rely on Omnisend every day. Head to omnisend.com/CTC and start on the free plan today. That's omnisend.com/CTC. Hey folks, welcome back to the e-commerce playbook podcast. I'm your host, Richard Gaffin, Director of Digital Product Strategy here at Common Thread Collective. And I'm joined, as always, by Taylor Holiday, our CEO here at Common Thread. Taylor, what's going on, man?
You know, I've beardless, got a haircut. It's a new chapter for me, Richard. The playoffs are over. Summer is upon us. We've got some exciting things I think we're going to be announcing next week. So feel baby-faced and ready, you know?
That's right. Lots of pages turning. But I don't know. Have we updated everybody on the playoffs?
Yeah,
I think we covered it last week.
Lost in the semifinals of the City Tournament of Champions. Scored 3 in the first inning. Gave up 5 the rest of the way. Heartbreak. Kids battled. Such is life, you know?
Yeah, there you go. You win some, you lose some.
That's it.
Valuable lessons for all of us, huh? All right, well, speaking of winning some and losing some, I don't know how good of a segue that is. So last week, actually, you, Taylor, sat down for kind of a little bit of a roundtable with some of our data folks to chat a little bit about the state of the industry generally. And now this is not something that we haven't talked about before, but I think one particular focus of that talk was specifically how bankruptcy has been affecting a lot of D2C brands recently, and how just generally the atmosphere is can feel a little bit discouraging right now. So I think what we wanted to talk about is maybe, Taylor, have you quickly recap some of the takeaways from that discussion, and then have you jump into maybe a few actionable steps that you can take to kind of counteract this current environment. So yeah, why don't you give us a little recap?
Yeah, we were gathered to sort of respond to Rishabh's initial tweet talking about the built with data, and he came on to give some context. And if you haven't listened to it, I would go. I think those are 4 really smart people providing real data across very broad samples that I think is useful. And one of the things that it was described as is sort of a tale of 2 cities, is there are brands that are succeeding and doing really, really well. And then there are brands that are struggling immensely. And Leo even though he wasn't there, he had shared with me via DM a little bit of data that said that they had more bankruptcies filed in the month of April than the previous year. And so that was really concerning and sort of illustrated one half of the story. And so today, I wanted to try and not just leave people with that ambiguity, but try and offer. Over the last week, I've been consuming a bunch of content, and I think there's a couple of things that to me jump out as all right, if you're in these tale of 2 cities, if you're in the one where there's real struggle, whether it's tariff related, whether it's efficiencies, all sorts of problems, what do you do? And where can I give you some direction to go and at least enrich yourself in some possibility to get some action coming out of that feeling?
Yeah. All right. So let's dive into kind of, I think, the 3 things that you mentioned. So the first is, and again, I'm sort of summarizing here, you can do a better job than me, of course, but it's something about turning suppliers into lenders. Particularly, this is about capitalization, right? So why don't you kind of dive into
So
that?
if I think about the core issue, the main reason bankruptcy occurs is very practically you run out of money, right? And I have a talk that if you haven't watched on the D2C evolution, you should go check that out on YouTube. But the whole point is that the underpinning of growth in our industry is all related to the availability of capital. And sitting here today, there's a big problem in that there's almost no available capital. Debt is very expensive. There's very little equity financing, although there may be hope in both cases in the not so distant future. But today, this is the core problem. I believe, of growth in our industry is the lack of availability of capital. So to solve that core problem, I think the primary solution is to try to turn your manufacturer into your lender. If you think about the two biggest line items on an e-commerce P&L, you have COGS and you have CAC. These are like what e-commerce businesses function on, and the COGS part is in particular insidious because you have to buy the inventory before you sell it, whereas the CAC portion is the opposite. You are actually generating the revenue before you have to pay your credit card usually. So the CAC one is way less actually hard to solve for. You have to be efficient with that spend for sure, but the CAC or the COGS one is in particular where you die. And I thought, so what I want you to do is I want you to go listen to an episode of former e-commerce playbook podcast host Andrew Ferris talking to Roman Khan about this exact topic, about turning your suppliers into your lender and why that is a viable path and how to pursue that. So this may involve getting on a plane to China. This may involve building personal relationships. It may involve getting clarity onto the invoices so you can understand the actual bill of supply from your lender to understand how they make money, to be able to meet them in deal making. But the point is that capital is the primary problem. Your lender, I think for many of you, could be the solution. And that is, for me, the thing that you need to go spend time on. And I thought this episode was absolutely fantastic.
Yeah. So actually, and we'll drop a link to that episode in the show notes. Can you also, what's the name, Taylor, of the pod in the episode?
I think it's the AJF growth.
The
Andrew, what's it?
Andrew Ferris podcast, I think.
Yeah, I don't know. Sorry, Andrew. It should be pretty straightforward. Andrew Ferris podcast. Yeah, that is what it's called. AJFgrowth.com or YouTube or wherever else. But yeah, it's a great episode. Roman is a sort of hidden gem in our industry, runs a large number of brands. But really, like the point of the conversation, I think, to me, is centering on this idea that your suppliers have the capacity to become your capital partner and to think of them rather than just your manufacturing provider, and actually to think about them as the financial engine that you partner with to help make e-commerce work. And I think that's really, really important.
Fascinating. Okay, so let's jump over to our second point here, which is around something that the CEO of Skims tweeted out. We both had a whack at pronouncing his name. I don't know where we're at.
Yeah, Jens Grad. I don't know. I'm probably messing that up. It's Swedish. I should be able to get closer, but he was on the Invest with the Best podcast, and it's a great episode. If you haven't listened, I'm giving you more to go do here. I know I'm not just giving you the solution, but at the heart of this was a bunch of things. One was about product as the centerpiece for your brand and how important that is to get right. There was a lot of conversation about pop culture and how to drive demand. And again, if we work through these line items of what is deteriorating your business, we talked about COGS. Now we're going to talk here about CAC, which is this idea that the capacity to drive demand in this organic flywheel comes from tapping into these engines. So product as an organic flywheel, when product is so good, people talk about it, okay? That creates one loop that will help to spread your product and business in an organic fashion on a pay basis. The other is this idea of pop culture. It's how do I insert myself into a wave or phenomenon that exists in order to sort of siphon some of that towards your business or product. And that as an exercise, I think, is something that brands too often exist in their own reality where they think of themselves as detached from culture instead of participatory in it. And I think there's a lot to be learned there about how you can begin to think about unhooking yourself from the primary and solo demand engine of your business existing on a paid basis where you're grinding out this ever declining efficiency of acquisition into trying to tap into something bigger and broader that could drive a disproportionate gain on the P&L on the CAC side of things.
Mm-hmm. So actually, I'm interested to hear a little bit more about like your insights or your takes on this specific thing. Oftentimes, like when you think about a brand inserting themselves into pop culture, you think about people in a boardroom talking about how we have to say on fleek in our tweets now or whatever.
Yeah.
But it can actually definitely be done well. So give us some examples of like what that looks like, maybe in your experience or just generally. Still juggling multiple tools for email, SMS, and push marketing? Omnisend brings them all together in one powerful platform built for e-commerce. You can launch pre-built automation workflows, build audience segments based on shopping behavior, and even gamify your sign-up forms without spending weeks learning the tool. It just works, and it's built to scale with you. Every account starts on a free plan. And unlike other platforms, Omnisend gives you 24/7 human support no matter your tier. Check it out at omnisend.com/CTC or click the link in the description.
Yeah. So I think one of the ones that I've lived through. Well, so one of the things he talks about, and I'll tell you, I'm going to take you through this sort of journey of my own personal experience. The first brand we ever built, Power Balance. I've told a little bit of this story. $0 in paid advertising. It was all built through athletes as the primary cultural vehicle for establishing authority for the business. And so it was just mass product seeding to athletes. And one of the interesting points that Jean Grenay brings up in this is that when we were kids, so go back to like the 90s, early 2000s, 20% of people wanted to be athletes. Like if you asked kids, and now it's like 3% and 21% want to be creators or influencers. Okay. So the center where culture is sort of centered around has shifted, but I look at the same idea of attaching yourself to one of those vehicles, whether it, for me at the Power Balance Day, was the athlete getting on Kevin Durant and Derrick Rose and Matt Kemp and Kobe Bryant and all the people that we seeded product to, having Shaq be an owner in the business, like all those mechanisms that drove adoption and awareness of our product because they were the driver of culture at the time, to now Skims leveraging Kim Kardashian, who he sort of refers to her as the Michael Jordan of influencers, right? Like sort of the same idea of he's drawing this comparison in the episode to the Jordan brand and how the Jordan brand was built and got beyond Michael Jordan and blah, blah, blah. And Kim is sort of like the modern day, in his words, version of that. And so I think there's a lesson there to understand what is moving culture. Like what do children aspire to become? And how do we then think about our product attaching to that aspirational identity for the customer that we serve, whether that's a child or a mom or a dad or whoever that you're serving? What is the cultural identity and how has that changed over time and where is it today? So I think that's an experience that I've had. The second area is to think about the underpinnings of cultural movements and communities that exist. We used to talk about this idea at Kalo around groups that were digitally identifiable and aggregated together online. And so the obvious example for us at the time was CrossFit. CrossFit was this wave that was growing of the fitness community that these people, the number one joke, right, is how do you know somebody does CrossFit is because they told you within 2 seconds or whatever it is, right? But the point of that is that is there's a virality to that kind of attribute. And this community of like people putting their hand up and identifying and aggregating around these attributes, if you can insert yourself into that, you can ride the momentum of that virality, right? Because if these people are out spreading the gospel of CrossFit and part of that is they're wearing your shirt, shoes, ring, whatever, while doing it, you're going to benefit from some of that dispersion. So I think those kind of like digitally identifiable communities or growing waves, I think about diet fads. Like I think about there's all sorts of places where these things get tapped into. Right now it's around GLP-1s and things like that. Like there's these attributes, how fast AI products are growing. And, you go read every tweet thread from Greg Eisenberg and it's like, you want to know how to build a big company? Identify a very narrow niche and wrap AI around it, right? It's like these kinds of ideas, I think, are often where people miss. And so for brands, what does that mean? Well, it probably means like really narrowing the definition of the customer you serve potentially as like a starting point is to actually become very specifically for somebody that has momentum, that has built-in community and virality in a way that you could potentially benefit from some of that versus just trying to constantly message to everyone all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, I think an important distinction there is that what you're talking about is affecting pop culture being part of it. We were talking about is infiltration more so than just sort of externally participating in it somehow, by which I mean,
That's right.
instead of the thing of like, I don't know, Wendy's has a funny Twitter account, which is probably great for them, but that's not really what we're talking about here. We're actually talking about niching down, becoming part of a culture, and then allowing the kind of the virality to organically stem out of the fact that you're already part of it.
Let me give you another example of this coming to life, and it's a callback to something we talked about the other day. So the All American Rejects thing, did you see,
Yeah.
Richard? Okay, so
That's
the
right.
All American Rejects were doing this house tour where they were just basically showing up all over the country to people's backyards and playing concerts. This crashed into another thing that I've been watching very closely, which is the growth of the Savannah Bananas. So I'm a big baseball guy. The Savannah Bananas have become like this cultural, you think about again, affecting pop culture, moving through everything thing in baseball where they're now selling out stadiums like crazy. And these two things collided this past week where the Savannah Bananas sold out Fenway Park. And in the middle of the game, the All-American Rejects showed up and played a concert in the middle of the game. Because what did the Savannah Bananas understand? What is a cultural phenomenon on TikTok where every time this happens, it gets a ton of views? Bring these things together to the benefit of the Savannah Bananas, right? That is an example of understanding cultural movement occurring and figuring out how to insert yourself in it. And I get it. If you're a, $500,000 business, that's not possible. But if you're an 8-figure brand, I bet you could figure out how to rent a house and get the All-American Rejects to show up. Now, maybe it's too late, but the point is, if you're tuned in to the cultural underpinning of what is happening that's drawing attention right now organically and naturally, and you can figure out a way to insert yourself into it in a way that's authentic and real, you can benefit disproportionately from that process. And I would say their CEO or their founder is, I think, the best marketer in America right now. Like what he has done is incredible. Like they are driving so much demand, and he sort of fancies himself the modern day Walt Disney is like his ambition for himself. So I love the like grandiose nature of the thing he's trying to do, and also the way in which they're doing it. And we went, they sold out Angel Stadium 3 nights in a row here. We're talking sold out Fenway Park. They had 100,000 people at the Carolina Panthers stadium. Like it's been really incredible to watch, but it's these little connections back to culture where they're inserting people into the process and trading on that local equity. They had Johnny Damon come out and play at the Red Sox game. So they're understanding how to pull in pieces of existing stories into theirs in a way that they don't depend on their story alone being the platform for it, right? And that's another thing that even in the Skims conversation, he was talking about how one of the brilliant things that Kim has done is that she's turned Skims into a platform bigger than herself. Like they are regularly bringing in other influencers. They did a big partnership with the WNBA and had all those athletes in there. And they're trying to think about it bigger even than Kim herself, is to think about it as a platform to invite in other cultural tenants to impact the brand itself. So the biggest risks of death go back to inventory planning in e-commerce. And one of the biggest risk moments tends to be right now is that you're going to have to place a PO for Q4. And Q4 is usually your largest inventory outlay and tends to tie to a period, unless you've already bought into 4 peaks theory, an area, the summers are a little slow. That's what we just came out of talking about last episode. And so you have this dual risk. You have low existing cash flow and a need for your largest PO. And so this moment right now represents a really high risk decision that you might need to make. And if you're on the verge of having to make that decision, let us help by providing a third-party point of view on your Q4 forecast. Let us give you the reality of what is likely to occur on the basis of our modeling, our team's view. None of the emotional desires out of the forecast that tend to plague entrepreneurs is that you want something to be true. We can just tell you what we see in the numbers. And as a point of view prior to making that decision, that can be incredibly helpful. So as you're pursuing turning your lenders in, or your manufacturer into lenders, you're figuring out how to get into pop culture, figure out how to make a really data-informed decision to help you get into the best financial position possible ahead of the year's biggest moment. I recognize that it's hard and that you are not alone in that, and there are solutions. I hope those pieces of content give you a little bit of energy to go solve a problem if you're facing it. And as always, we would love to chat. You can DM me, you can email us. We want to be a part of providing solutions to this community on a long-term basis. We've been at it for a decade, and we hope to for another decade to come. So don't be discouraged. Keep going.